Rock gardens don't have to be brown, dry, and boring. You can have a low maintenance garden that pops with color, lush greenery, and has the added benefit of being deer and drought resistant. Welcome to Fix It Wise, where you get to build, fix, and cook amazing things. In this episode, we're going to show you a sweet little rock garden that my wife and I built in the central Texas hill country. We were very pleased with the way it turned out. In fact, we put it to the test soon after construction by leaving for 2.5 months in the middle of the summer. We returned in mid-September to find everything thriving. Our little rock garden experiment worked on autopilot, even during a record drought. We're also honored that the Central Texas Gardener featured us on one of their episodes in February 2020. We're breaking this project into 4 separate YouTube episodes: design, demolition, and preparation, welding the metal edging. Next will be the placement of the rock and plants. Last will be installing a disappearing fountain made from a boulder we dug out of our yard. We were used to growing pansies in Houston, where there's plentiful rain, fertile soil, and limited deer. Kathy's going to kill me for showing this, but here's a shot of her wrestling a century plant right after we moved in. Gardening in the Central Texas hill country required a whole new set of skills. The deer constantly made a meal of our fresh plantings. Eventually, we learned to use deer-resistant plants like lantana, cactus, succulents, herbs, and ultimately rocks. Deer can't eat those. Kathy had just about given up, but got an idea one day to create an abstract work of art on the ground. She sketched up this design of a rock garden. Her vision was to offer the viewer an impression of moving water, sandy beaches, and grassy knolls, with punches of color throughout. I was hooked. I got busy transplanting the crepe myrtles while she leveled the soil and installed a weed barrier. Then she carefully transferred the design to the ground using colored strings and magic markers. I went to work bending, forming, and welding the metal borders to contain the rock, beaches, and plantings. 2-inch by 1/8-inch thick metal strapping from our local steel supplier proved to be the perfect height and workability. I welded the strapping to 12-inch rebar stakes that held the design to the ground. The welds are mostly out of sight, so you really don't have to be a great welder to do this. The bending and forming of the spiral did prove to be a challenge with a cheap $100 metal bender, but after a while I got the hang of it, and it turned out to be a lot of fun. We chose the thicker strapping because we wanted the natural look of rusted steel to blend in with the other earth tones. 1/8-inch steel will take a lifetime to rust in dry climates. Now, I do realize that forming and welding 2-inch metal strapping is not practical for everyone, so I'll show you an alternative edging that can be formed into tight radiuses like this. The key here is tight radiuses. In the rock and planting episode, we'll show you how we procured 2 tons of gray Mexican beach pebbles and a half a ton of jelly bean river rock. It took several trips to various stone yards to find the perfect rock. We selected these 2 for their smooth, water-worn edges and their colors. The creamy colors of the jelly bean rock mimicked the sandy beaches in Kathy's design. The jelly bean rock also had some nice pops of reds, pinks, and blue-grays. The blue-gray colors in the Mexican beach pebbles were the perfect medium to represent water. Plus, we were inspired to use the Mexican beach pebbles from a rock garden that we had admired in Houston, where the pebbles were stood on their edges and tightly packed together to form patterns. Kathy placed each beach pebble by hand, one by one to resemble the flow of a river. Each stone was selected for its size and shape. It was a very time-consuming process, but the outcome was spectacular. She was able to replicate the currents and eddies that she had dreamed up in her mind. As I worked on my part of the garden, I was truly amazed to watch the river reveal itself as Kathy worked on the currents and eddies, stone by stone, just from her sense of spatial arrangement. We also wanted a thin border that popped with the red color, so we decided to splurge on some beautiful red glass rock that offered just the right sparkle of intense color along that accent edge. We wanted a way to walk across the river without interrupting the flow. Unable to find anything available in stores, Kathy came up with the idea to cast concrete stepping stones with embedded Mexican beach pebbles sticking up from the concrete, matching the height of the other stones. They perfectly mimicked the eddies in the river. We were delighted to find out that deer don't really like herbs. We selected drought-tolerant and deer-resistant thyme and oregano to form our grassy knolls. Society garlic, silver ponyfoot, and a variety of succulents add a spot of color. Pom-pom junipers stand over the garden like bonsai trees. And with the Japanese lantern and Buddha, you get a nice, peaceful Zen feeling. The final YouTube episode will cover the installation of the disappearing fountain. By creating some flowing water at the beginning, we had hoped to add some real life and sound to our little faux river. And it worked. But man, that was a project in itself. It had to be excavated, plumbed, and safely supplied with electricity. In this episode, I'll be showing you some welding fabrication tricks that I used to arrange the metal borders around the fountain space. The challenge was making sure that the water drained back in the basin and the rocks were contained properly. The best part was that we found a honeycomb limestone boulder in our yard that worked perfectly.